first thing Instructor Primus Keth Varal did when he walked onto the yard was count us. Not the way an academy administrator counts heads at morning roll. Clipboard, stylus, neat little checkboxes. He counted the way a predator counts, standing still at the edge of the packed gravel field, while 43 cadets stood in intake formation, his pale gold eyes moving left to right and back again, as though each of us was a weight he was trying to estimate. His skin was the deep charcoal gray of a Solunai in his prime, ridged at the jaw and forearm, and he wore no insignia beyond the rank chevron burned directly into the hide of his left shoulder. 3 parallel scars that the Solunai military made their senior instructors earn in the field rather than receive at a ceremony. He was not tall for his species. He was wide in a way that did not come from the gym. He finished counting. His eyes settled on us, 4 of us in the back right corner of the formation. Me, Dara Osi, Tobias Ren, and Yuki Nakata. We had arrived at the Varik-Solon Combined Arms Academy on the same transport from the relay station at Herath IV, assigned together by a bureaucratic accident that none of us had bothered to correct because we'd served together before, and we knew what we had. The intake manifest had classified all 4 of us as light infantry support, grade 2, which was technically accurate in the same way that calling a demolition specialist a person who occasionally handles materials was technically accurate. It told you nothing useful. Keth Varal's gaze held on us for perhaps 3 seconds longer than it held on anyone else. Then he walked to the front of the formation and began to speak, and the yard went quiet in the way yards go quiet when the person speaking has the right to silence rather than simply demanding it. "I have run intake at this academy for 11 years, he said. His voice was a low, carrying instrument, stripped of ceremony. In that time, I have processed 416 cadets across 17 species. Of those, 209 graduated to active track standing. The rest were reassigned, medically separated, or voluntarily withdrew." He paused. "I want you to understand that I do not consider the second group failures. I consider them cadets who learned something true about themselves before they were deployed on somewhere that truth would have been expensive." He walked the length of the formation slowly, hands behind his back. "This yard will teach you the same thing it has taught every intake before you. It will teach you where you end. Every organism has a boundary, a physiological wall, a psychological threshold, point at which the body says no and the mind believes it. My job is not to push you past that point. My job is to find it. Once we know where it is, we can work with it. We can train around it. We can in some cases expand it." He stopped at the end of the line, pivoted, came back. "What we cannot do is pretend it does not exist. That pretense is the thing that kills cadets in the field. Not the enemy, not equipment failure, refusal to know themselves." He stopped in front of the formation and looked at us all again. "Today is a calibration exercise. You will not be graded, scored, or ranked. You will simply be observed. I want to see how you move, how you breathe, how you make decisions when you are uncomfortable. I want to see what you look like when things are going wrong." He let that land. "Fall out in PT order. You have 90 seconds. The formation broke. Around me, cadets from a dozen species began stripping outer gear and moving to the marked zones at the yard's edges. The Velhari cadets clustered near the western wall where the shade fell in the morning, their bioluminescent patches dimming in the direct sunlight. The 3 Duvan students moved with the careful ground-covering walk of a species that had evolved on high-gravity worlds and never quite trusted flat ground. The Solunai cadets, 8 of them, all in that same wide-hip, coiled posture as Keth Varal, arranged themselves with the precise spacing of people who had done military formation since childhood. Dara pulled off her over-jacket and rolled her neck once-twice. She was compact and dark and had the kind of stillness about her that people consistently misread as shyness until the moment it became inconvenient. Tobias was already at the starting line, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, the kind of man who had run so many miles in his life that his resting state looked like a warm-up. Yuki stood with her hands loosely at her sides, watching Keth Varal the way she watched most things, without appearing to watch them at all. I found my place in line between Dara and Yuki. Keth Varal had 3 assistant instructors positioned at the yard's corners, each holding a data slate. and watching the cadets with the careful attention of people being paid to notice things. One of them, a young Solunai female with a clean, unscorched rank bar, was looking at us with an expression I had seen on instructors before, the mild curiosity of someone who has just noticed that the intake manifest and the assembled personnel do not entirely match. That expression would sharpen considerably before the day was out. The first exercise was a run. Not a sprint, a distance run, the kind designed to sort cadets into pace brackets, so the instructors could measure aerobic baselines. Course was a 2-kilometer loop around the perimeter of the yard, marked by orange flags, and the instructions were simple. Maintain whatever pace you could hold without stopping. No time limit stated. They would observe how long each cadet ran, and at what pace before degradation began to show. Keth Varal said begin, and the formation moved. The Velhari cadets opened fast. Their species had a high ratio lung capacity and a cardiovascular system built for short to medium efforts, and they hit the first flag at a pace that drew quiet comments from the assistant instructors. The Solunai cadets ran with that characteristically powerful, slightly rolling stride, settling into a ground-eating tempo. The Duven students were slower off the line, but showed almost no visible fatigue in their faces at any point. It was less encouraging than it sounded. Duven physiology registered distress in ways that weren't legible to other species until the distress becomes serious. We ran at the back of the field. This was a choice. I want to be clear about that, because from the outside it can look like something it isn't. We were not warming up. We were not being cautious. We were not, as one of the Solunai cadets near the front would later suggest, afraid of running hard. We were running the pace we intended to hold. For however long this exercise lasted, was not a pace we had been told, because no one had told us it would be an endurance test, which experience had taught us to read from the setup. 2 kilometers of loop, no stated limit, instructors watching for degradation. That is not a sprint course. That is an attrition course. You run attrition courses at a pace that leaves something in reserve for the question you haven't been asked yet. So we ran, the 4 of us in a loose diamond, Tobias at point, Dara and I on the wings, Yuki at the back where she liked to be. We talked a little quietly, the way you do on a run when breathing is still easy. Dara made a dry observation about the sand content of the yard surface. Tobias said he'd run worse. Yuki said nothing, which was normal. By the third loop, 8 of the 43 cadets had stopped or slowed to a walk. By the 5th, it was 14. The Velhari students who had opened fast were now struggling. Their high ratio lung capacity was a 30-minute advantage, not an all-day one, and the sun had climbed, and the yard's surface was radiating heat back up into the field in a way that was doing no one any favors. We ran. The young assistant instructor with the clean rank bar had stopped making notes and was just watching us. At some point, Keth Varal appeared at the edge of my peripheral vision, standing with his arms folded at the yard's southern wall, and I had the distinct impression that he had been there for a while. By the 8th loop, it was 22 cadets stopped or walking. 2 of the Duven students had gone down on the same pass, which appeared to be a physiological threshold event rather than a choice. They sat on the ground with their legs folded and breathed in a controlled pattern, while an assistant instructor came to them with equipment. One Solunai cadet was still running but was visibly laboring, his gait shortened, his jaw set in the horizontal clench of a species fighting its own chemistry. We ran. At loop 11, the remaining running cadets were us, Solunai students, and one Velhari cadet, who had apparently found a second gear and was moving with a grim, metronomic efficiency that I found genuinely admirable. At loop 13, the 3 Solunai cadets stopped. The Velhari cadet ran 2 more loops before she too stepped to the side, bent at the waist and breathed. At loop 15, Keth Varal said, "Halt." We stopped. The yard was quiet except for the sound of breathing. Everyone else's labored, ragged, the particular sound of a respiratory system that has been spending from a limited account. Tobias's breathing was even. Dara had a slight elevation in hers, the kind that meant she was working but not working hard. Mine was similar. Yuki sounded like she had been sitting in the shade. Keth Varal walked to the center of the yard and looked at us. All of us, the whole intake, but his gaze came to rest on us in the back. He said nothing for a moment, then water break, 12 minutes. Stay on the yard. We went to the water station. Around us, cadets drank deeply. Some of them stretched out on the gravel in postures of pure exhaustion. One of the Velhari students with his arm over his face and his bioluminescent patches completely dark. The young assistant instructor walked past us on her way to brief Keth Viral, and I caught the edge of what she said. Light infantry support. 2 words. With a particular inflection. The kind of inflection that means, I don't think the classification is right. Keth Viral's response was too quiet to hear. Tobias handed me a water container. He's going to scale it up. Yes, I said, good. He drank. Was getting bored. Dara looked at the sky. The sun was full up now. No hint of morning cool left in it. Yard surface is going to be unpleasant in another hour. Already is, Yuki said. She was right. The gravel had been absorbing heat since dawn, and was now beginning to radiate it in the slow, steady way that makes a training surface feel like it is actively working against you. It would peak around midday and hold there for several hours. This was, I suspected, not an accident of scheduling. The 12 minutes ended. Keth Viral did not tell us what came next. He walked to a storage shed at the yard's northern wall and came back wheeling a flat cart stacked with load frames. The standard issue training, packs used at Solunai military academies, each one calibrated to a percentage of the wearer's body weight. He positioned the cart in the center of the yard. Load carry, he said. Each frame is set to 20% of body mass. You will find your frame on the left-hand side of the cart. They have been labeled with your intake numbers. You will pick up your frame. You will walk a course I am going to mark in the next 3 minutes. And you will keep walking until I tell you to stop. No running. No assistance. No setting the frame down. He walked to the cart and began marking the course with a can of field paint. A figure-8 pattern around 2 central pillars, tight turns at each end, the kind of route designed to prevent you from settling into a rhythm. The cadets found their frames. The Velhari students, who had the lowest average body mass in the intake, had lighter frames than most. The Duven students, who were carrying more weight to begin with, had heavier ones. The framing was proportional rather than equal, which was the point. Picked up my frame and settled it onto my shoulders. It was heavy in the way that 20% of body mass is heavy. Present, inescapable, requiring constant acknowledgement. You cannot forget it. It changes your gait, loads your joints differently, asks something continuous of your postural muscles. After 10 minutes, it asks something of your will. After 30, it asks something more fundamental than that. We walked. The figure-8 turned out to be roughly 400 meters per loop, tight enough at the corners that you couldn't lean into momentum to get through them. Wide enough in the straights that you had time to feel the weight settle into your trapezoids and hip flexors before the next turn came. Keth Viral walked the perimeter of the course, not following any particular cadet, just moving and watching. His assistant instructors marked times on their slates and exchanged quiet words. At the 40-minute mark, 2 Velhari cadets set their frames down and did not pick them back up. The assistant instructors went to them, noted something on their slates, and guided them to the shade at the yard's edge. At the 50-minute mark, one of the Duven students, the one who had not been part of the threshold event earlier, went down on one knee with his frame still on, which is the particular posture of a body that is delivering a warning it means. An instructor reached him quickly. We walked. Around the hour mark, the yard surface was doing exactly what Dara had predicted. The heat came up from the gravel in visible waves now, and the air above it had that particular weight that makes each breath feel like an effort of its own. I was sweating in the way that means the cooling system is doing its job, which is fine, which also means you are spending fluid at a rate that matters. I had drunk at the water break. I would need to drink again. Tobias, walking half a step ahead of me on the straight, said very quietly, "Corner in 6 steps, weight's going to shift left." "Already in it," I said. He took the corner cleanly. So did I. This is the thing about operating with people you know. You do not have to announce what you are doing, in most cases, because the other people have already read the environment and arrived at the same conclusion. Tobias could see the corner as well as I could. He said what he said not because I needed the warning, but because we have a habit, built over years, talking each other through the same terrain, we are both navigating. It is a comfort mechanism dressed up as communication, and there is nothing wrong with it. At the 90-minute mark, 15 cadets were at the yard's edge, frames down. 3 remaining Solunai cadets were still walking, but their posture had changed. The characteristic rolling stride had flattened, the head had come down, the jaw had set. They were sending from the reserve. They had a reserve to spend, said something good about their conditioning. But spending it meant the clock was running. Keth Varal stopped walking the perimeter and stood in the center of the course, watching. Not all of us. I noticed him looking the way you notice a fixed point when everything else is in motion. He was not hostile, not skeptical, not performing the evaluative squint of an instructor who has decided something and is looking for confirmation. He was watching with a particular quality of attention that belongs to someone who has encountered data that does not fit his existing model and is trying to decide what to do about it. Yuki came up beside me on the straight. "He's counting again," she said. "I know. Different kind of counting." "Yes." She dropped back to her position. The corner came and went. At the 2-hour mark, the last of the non-human cadets set down his frame. He was a Solunai cadet named Vath Koran. I would learn the name later, who had run 15 loops in the morning and walked 2 hours under load, without once showing the horizontal jaw set that marked a Solunai in visible distress. He set his frame down with deliberate care, not dropping it, not falling with it, just placing it on the gravel and standing over it for a moment before stepping away. There was dignity in that. I noted it. The yard was now 4 cadets and the instructor Primus. Keth Varal looked at us. We walked the course. The heat came up from the gravel. None of us said anything. After another 5 minutes, Keth Varal said, "Drop frames." We set them down. "Water," he said, 20 minutes. "The yard is yours." He walked toward the storage shed. The rest of the intake was at the shaded perimeter. Some of them were watching us with expressions I had seen before, on alien faces and human ones alike, that mix of genuine bewilderment and something that might have been, in a different context, reassessment. Vath Koran, the last of the Solunai cadets to have set down his frame, was sitting on the gravel near the water station with his arms on his knees and his head up, and he watched us walk to the water with an expression that was not quite neutral. I drank. Tobias ate something he'd kept in his uniform pocket, which was against the stated intake rules, but which Keth Varal had either not noticed or had chosen not to address. Dura stretched her hip flexors methodically, working through the same sequence she always worked through after heavy load carry, face closed and inward-looking in the way it got when she was taking inventory of her body. Yuki sat on the gravel, legs folded, eyes half closed. "You think comes after the water break," Dara said, not directing it at anyone. "Stress drill," Tobias said. He said it the way he said most things. Matter of fact, no particular weight on it. "Agree," I said. "He's been building toward isolation. Fun to establish baseline. Load to establish load tolerance and willingness. Next is probably a confined or controlled stress environment to see how decision-making degrades under accumulated fatigue. His report on us so far," Yuki said without opening her eyes, "is going to be short." "Very," I agreed. Dara finished her stretch and sat. "Think he's looked at the original intake files yet?" "The assistant with the clean rank bar has," I said. "She's told him. What she found is a different question." "She's told him," Tobias said. "Look at his posture." I looked. Keth Varal had come back off from the storage shed and was standing at the yard's center, not walking the perimeter, reviewing his slate. Standing still, arms behind his back in the posture of a person who is deciding something. Tobias was right. He'd been told. Light infantry support grade 2. That was what the manifest said. What the manifest did not say, because the processing clerk at the relay station at Harith Civi had made an error that none of us had corrected, was what light infantry support actually meant in our case. It did not mean what it meant for most cadets in that classification. It meant what it had come to mean on the 3 deployments we had completed together, before we ended up at a combined arms academy, because the joint required a year of formal institutional training, and the military had sent us where the paperwork said we fit. Service records were in a separate file that required a second-tier clearance to access. The intake manifest was first-tier only. Keth Varal had presumably just read enough to understand that there was a discrepancy between what he'd seen this morning and what his classification system said he should have seen. I was curious what he would do about it. The 20 minutes ended. Isolation exercise, Keth Varal said. Called it. He explained the exercise, with the same strict economy he brought to everything. Each cadet would be taken to one of the yard's 6 isolation cells, small, enclosed spaces used in Solunai military training, to evaluate composure under confinement and sensory reduction, where they would spend a variable period between 40 minutes and 3 hours, with no external input, no communication, no tasks assigned. The variable period was the point, not work backward from a known end time to pace your patience. You sat. You waited. You discovered what your mind did when it had nothing to do, and no way to know how long that would last. The isolation cells had instrumentation. Keth Varal would be watching biometric output, heart rate, cortisol equivalent, stress markers appropriate to each species. The exercise would end when the indicator readings stabilized, or when they did not stabilize and the time limit was reached, which was the other kind of data. He sent the intake to the cells in batches of 6. We went in the last batch. My cell was approximately 2 meters square, sealed on all sides, no windows. A single low-intensity amber light that was too dim to read by and too bright to sleep comfortably under. The floor was padded. The ambient temperature was mild. There was nothing in the cell except the cell. I sat down. I want to describe this accurately, because there is a version of this story in which the isolation cell is difficult for us, and we prevail by being very determined, and that version would be wrong. The isolation cell was not difficult. I have sat in places like it before, under conditions less comfortable than this one, with less certainty about what would happen when the door opened again. 40 minutes to 3 hours in a quiet room with a padded floor is not a trial. It is an interval. I thought about things. Not strategically, not in any organized way. Just the way you think when your body is tired and your mind has been given space and the familiar shape of your own. Consciousness is the available entertainment. I thought about the run. I thought about the figure 8 course, and the way Tobias had said, corner in, 6 steps, and I had said, already in it. I thought about Voth Koren, setting his frame down with deliberate care and the dignity in that. I thought about the assistant instructor with the clean rank bar, and the expression on her face when she looked at us. I thought, at some length, Keth Varal. 11 years running intake, 416 cadets. That is not a career assignment, that is a vocation. A person who takes on that kind of work for 11 years has made a choice about what they value, and what Keth Varal apparently valued was the truth of where things end, the honest accounting of limits. He had explained this himself in the opening remarks, and I had no reason to think it was performance. It sounded like belief. Problem with that belief, I thought, when applied to our intake this morning, was that it had run into the particular difficulty that arises when the instrument you are using to measure a thing has not been calibrated for what it is measuring. Keth Varal's yard was a precision instrument. It was built to find the walls of Solunai physiology, Velhari physiology, Duven physiology, species whose limits the Academy had decades of data on, whose degradation curves were well mapped. Breaking points could be reliably predicted from early-stage indicators. Human physiology was less well mapped. Human psychology even less so, and the specific version of human present in the yard today was, I suspected, not well mapped at all. The amber, light held, the cell held, I breathed. Somewhere between what felt like 50 minutes and what felt like 2 hours, the door opened. Keth Varal was standing in the corridor outside, not an assistant instructor, the instructor primus himself. He looked at me. I looked at him. His expression was the same one I had been trying to read since the morning. Not hostile, not warm, just attentive, collecting. How long do you think you've been in there? He said. 90 minutes, I said. Give or take 10. He looked at the data on the slate in his hand. 87. Close. He stepped back and I came out into the corridor. The other 3 cells on our row were open. Dara, Tobias, and Yuki were already out, standing in a loose group the way we always stood, the particular ease of people who do not feel the need to fill space. Yuki had apparently been asleep for part of her isolation, which the biometric record would confirm. and which Keth Viral was going to have to decide what to do with. He looked at the four of us. "Walk with me," he said. We walked with him back to the yard, which was now late afternoon, the sun past its peak, and the heat beginning its slow retreat from the gravel surface. The rest of the intake was assembled in the shade. Some of them were still visibly tired. Some were watching us. Keth Viral stopped in the center of the yard and turned to face us. "Intake manifest classifies all four of you as light infantry support, grade 2, he said. "Yes," I said. "That classification carries a baseline conditioning standard," he said, though. "Light infantry support cadets are expected to complete the morning run at a pace sufficient to pass a standard fitness assessment. They are not expected to run 15 loops at calibration pace. They are not expected to complete a 2-hour load carry without physiological indicators of significant distress. They are not expected to spend 90 minutes in an isolation cell with a resting heart rate." He was not accusatory, he was inventorying. "My assistant instructor pulled your service file this afternoon," he said. "The full record, not the intake manifest." I said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. It required a second-tier clearance that she does not technically have authority to access without my countersignature," he said. "Countersigned it." Yuki, very quietly, made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound she made when something confirmed a prediction she had been sitting on. No one else would have recognized it. "I want to ask you something," Keth Viral said, "and I want an honest answer, not a diplomatic one." "All right," I said. "The exercises this morning were calibrated for an intake that includes cadets from 17 species at various conditioning levels. They were not calibrated for your service history. For the cadets they were designed for, they represent a genuine test of limits, a real encounter with the edge of what those cadets can do on a given day." He paused. "For the four of you, what were they?" I thought about that. Not long. It was not a complicated question. "A moderate morning," I said. The yard was quiet. The rest of the intake could hear us. The distance was not great enough for it to be otherwise. Keth Viral was still for a moment. "Moderate," he repeated. "The run was well designed for its purpose," I said, "because I wanted to be accurate and not dismissive. 15 loops at that pace on that surface, in that heat, after an overnight transit, is not trivial. Cadets who have not trained specifically for extended aerobic output under thermal stress, it is a significant challenge. The load carry similarly. 20% of body mass for 2 hours on a tight turn course is a real number. The isolation cell is well calibrated for what it's testing." I stopped. "It's just that none of it was designed for what we are." "And what are you?" he said. Not aggressive, genuinely asking. I looked at Tobias, who was looking at the middle distance in the way that meant he had an answer and was deciding whether to say it. I looked at Dara, whose expression was closed and careful. I looked at Yuki, who was watching Keth Viral with the particular quality of attention she brought to people she had decided were worth watching. "Light infantry support, grade 2, I said. "Technically." Something shifted in Keth Viral's face. It was not a smile. The Solunai do not smile the way humans do. The musculature does not arrange itself that way. But it was something adjacent to a smile. Recognition, perhaps. The expression of a person who has been told a dry answer to a straight question and has found it acceptable. "The rest of the intake is dismissed for the day," he said, raising his voice enough to reach the assembled cadets in the shade. "Port tomorrow at 0600. Standard PT order." The cadets moved. Some of them glanced at us as they left the yard. Voth Koren, Solunai student who had walked 2 hours under load, paused near us as he passed. He looked at me directly. Solunai make eye contact the way they make most social gestures, with a deliberateness that means they are choosing to, and said, in accented standard, "Good pace this morning." "Good carry," I said. He held my gaze a moment longer, then moved on. Keth Viral waited until the yard was empty before he spoke again. "I need to understand what I have," he said, "not for the intake record, for my own purposes." He looked at the four of us. "The Academy does not have a conditioning program designed for what your service history describes. That program does not exist here. What I have is what I use today. Exercises calibrated for an intake populations whose upper boundary is a well-conditioned Solunai cadet in peak form." He paused. "You are significantly above that boundary." "We're aware," Tobias said. It was the first time he had spoken since leaving the isolation cell. "The formal program will not challenge you," Keth Varal said. "Shh. Which means you will spend a year doing conditioning exercises that do not improve your conditioning, at a pace that does not represent a real effort for you, while the Academy awards you marks for work that costs you nothing." He stopped. "I find that unacceptable." He was not asking for our input. He was stating a problem he had identified and was working through aloud. "The alternative," he said, "is that I design a parallel track." He said this slowly, as though the idea was arriving as he spoke it rather than having been prepared in advance. One that uses you as the ceiling rather than Salunai peak form. One that asks something real of you. He looked at me. "That would require me to understand what real looks like for your unit." "We could tell you," I said. "I would need more than telling," he said. "I would need to see it." I looked at Dara. She raised an eyebrow by approximately 2 millimeters, which was her version of a full-body shrug. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "We'll show you what a real morning looks like for us." "Oh, 600, he said. "Earlier," Tobias said. 400. "The yard's cooler then and the surface is better." Keth Varal looked at Tobias for a moment. "Oh, 400, he said. "I'll be here." He walked off the yard. The four of us stood there in the late afternoon light, the gravel still giving back heat at our feet. The sky doing the particular thing it did at this latitude when the sun got low, turning a color that had no exact name in standard, something between copper and gray, and the memory of a different kind of sky entirely. Tobias said, "He's going to run with us." "Yes," I said. "Time he's done that in 11 years, probably." Probably. Dara was still watching the gate Keth Varal had walked through. "He's good," she said. "The morning was well designed for its purpose. He knows what he's doing." "He does," I agreed. Yuki sat on the gravel. "I slept for 40 minutes in the isolation cell," she said, by way of nothing in particular. "I know," I said. His face when he saw the biometric read, Tobias said. "He held it," Dara said. "He's good at holding it." "He is," I agreed. We stayed on the yard until the heat went out of the gravel, and the sky finished doing what it was doing. There was no particular reason to stay, except that the yard was a good place to be at that hour. And we had nowhere else to be, and all four of us are, at some fundamental level, people who prefer to be outdoors when the option exists. At some point, I said, "The parallel track is going to be hard." "Yes," Dara said. "Not moderate." "No." "Good." She looked at me. "Yes," she said. "Good." We went to the barracks as the first stars showed up, and I lay on my bunk in the dark and thought about tomorrow at 0400. I went to sleep quickly, the way you do when the body has been used and knows it. The yard was cool at 4 in the morning, not comfortable. The desert cold that comes in the small hours at high altitude is not comfortable. It is merely different from the heat, trading one kind of pressure for another. But the gravel surface was firm, and the air was clear, and there was enough starlight to see by if you knew how to let your eyes adjust. Keth Varal was already there when we arrived. He was in PT gear, no rank insignia, no slate, no assistant instructors. Shh. Just himself standing in the center of the yard, the way he had stood on the first morning. Different. Less the instructor primus evaluating an intake. More a person who had shown up to a thing with no certainty about what the thing would be. I respected that. Showing up to uncertainty in the dark at 4 in the morning takes a particular kind of willingness that does not come, rank or reputation. "You set the program," I said. "It's your yard." He thought about this. "Show me what you do first. Then I'll decide if I can contribute anything." That was the right answer. Tobias ran the warm-up, a 20-minute sequence that looked, from the outside, like a moderate movement drill, and was from the inside, carefully constructed program that had been refined over 3 deployments to accomplish exactly what a warm-up needs to accomplish without wasting a single minute. Keth Varal followed it. He was not the best mover I had ever seen. He was a trained soldier with 11 years of physical conditioning work behind him. And he followed the sequence precisely and correctly, which told me that his body comprehension was good. After the warm-up, Dara ran a load carry, not 20% of body mass, 40. Keth Varal did not say anything when Dara handed him the frame and told him the weight. He put it on and walked to the start line. The course Dara marked was different from the figure 8. It was a long loop that climbed the yard's embankment, traversed the top for 100 meters, and came back down. which changed the load from a flat surface problem to an elevation problem, which is an entirely different engagement of musculature and far less forgiving over time. We walked. Keth Viral walked. He was carrying more than he had carried in years, possibly ever under a formal program. 40% of body mass is at the edge of what military load carry programs consider the productive training range before the injury risk begins, to outweigh the conditioning benefit, and the line varies by individual. I watched his form on the embankment. It was good. He made the adjustment that experienced load carriers make at the transition from flat to incline, shifting the weight slightly forward, shortening the stride, using the heel strike differently. He had done this before, in some form somewhere, not with this much weight, but the movement vocabulary was in his body. An hour in, Yuki went to the water station and came back with containers for all of us, including Keth Viral. She handed him one without comment. He took it without comment. That exchange took approximately 3 seconds and established something between them that I suspect neither of them would have been able to articulate if asked. At the 90-minute mark, Keth Viral set his frame down. He did it exactly the way Vath Koran had done it the previous day, with deliberate care, not dropping it, not falling with it. He stood over it for a moment. Then he picked it back up. I want to be honest about what happened in that moment, because I have seen it before, and I recognize it for what it is. Keth Viral reached his wall. He found it. The thing he had described in his opening remarks to the intake, the boundary where the body says no, and the mind believes it. He set the frame down because his body had delivered that message, and his conscious mind had processed it as instruction. And then he picked it back up. Not to pick it told him to. Not because we were watching. Because something else in him. The part that had spent 11 years finding other organisms' limits and had, somewhere in the process, become curious about his own, decided that the message was not final, that the wall was a wall and not a ceiling, that he was not done. We walked. 2 hours, Dara called the carry. Keth Viral set his frame down for the second time. He stood with his hands on his knees for a moment, breathing through the recovery pattern that his body knew. The Solifani respiratory recovery is different from the human one, faster in the first 2 minutes and then more gradual, and watching it work in real time after real exertion is a different thing from reading about it in a physiology manual. He straightened. Third exercise, he said. His voice was rough at the edges in a way it had not been before. Tobias looked at him for a moment. Are you asking or telling? Keth Viral looked at Tobias, asking. Stress circuit, Tobias said. 60 minutes. Timed stations. I know the stations, Keth Viral said. I designed the academy circuit. Then you know we'll modify them. Show me the modifications. Tobias showed him. I am not going to describe the circuit in detail because the details are not the point and because some of them belong to 3 deployments of iterative problem solving that are not mine to give away casually. What I will say is that the modifications took the standard stations, which were designed for cadets who had never encountered the thing the station was testing, and recalibrated them for people who had encountered it multiple times under field conditions. The result was not more of the same thing. It was a different thing that used the same equipment. The specific difference was this. The standard stations tested capacity under a single stressor applied cleanly and in isolation. Our modifications stacked stressors, load plus cold, endurance plus cognitive task, balance plus sustained compression, in combinations that the individual station was never designed to produce. A body that had been trained on clean single stressor challenges would hit the stacked version and find that its response patterns did not transfer the way it expected them to. That gap between what the body had learned to do and what the compound task required was the thing worth testing. It was also, in our experience, the thing most likely to be fatal if you found it for the first time in the field. Keth Viral ran the circuit. He did not complete all the stations. There were 2, a grip endurance station and a cold stress station, where his performance hit a ceiling that the standard circuit would never have found. He knew it before I said anything. His face did not change, but his movement changed in the way. Movement changes when a body has been given honest information about itself and is integrating it. He made a note on the inside of his forearm with a small stylus he kept there. which is a habit I recognized from the field. You write things where you will see them, not in a log that lives in a pocket, because the pocket is the wrong place for things that need to be remembered. At the end of the circuit, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. We stood in the yard and drank water and let the cool morning air do its work. The gravel was damp from the night's dew, and the world was very quiet in the way it is very quiet just before everyone else wakes up. Keth Varal was looking at his forearm. The notes were short, 3 lines abbreviated in a script I could not read. He looked at them for a while. "I owe you an explanation," he said eventually. "You don't." I said, "I do." He looked up. "When I ran intake yesterday, I was operating under a classification that was wrong. Not wrong in the way that classifications are sometimes imprecise, genuinely wrong. The exercise program I ran you through was not a test for you. It was a baseline assessment for cadets who are significantly below your level, and I ran it anyway because that is what the manifest said to do, and because I have been running the same program for 11 years and I did not question whether it applied." He stopped. "I should have questioned it," he said. "Within the first hour of the run, I had enough data to know that the manifest was inaccurate. I did not adjust. I let the program run, and I waited for my assistant to pull the full file." He paused again. "That is a failure of observation. Pride myself on observation." "You adjusted last night," I said. "The night before adjustment is not the adjustment." He said it flatly. "The way someone states a standard they have set for themselves and are measuring their own performance against. It was not self-flagellation. There was no excess emotion in it. It was an honest accounting. What I observed yesterday," he said, beginning approximately 40 minutes into the run, "is that the 4 of you were not operating anywhere near your ceiling. You were not managing effort. You were managing boredom. There is a difference. Managing effort is what every other cadet in that yard was doing. Managing boredom is what you were doing, and it looks different when you know what to look for." He looked at me. I should have known what to look for. "Now you do," Dara said. He looked at her. She had a quality, Dara, of saying the simple true thing in a way that closed the subject rather than extending it. Keth Varal appeared to recognize this and let it be closed. "The parallel track," he said. "I want to design it with you, not for you. Contributions from each member of your unit on what the program should test, what it should build, where the real ceiling is." He looked at all 4 of us. "I will run it with you." Tobias had been quiet for a while, which for Tobias meant he was thinking. Now he said, "Why?" Keth Varal considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because I have spent 11 years telling cadets that my job is to find where they end," he said. "I have found several hundred edges. I have never found mine." He paused. "I am 53 years old. If I am going to find it, I should do it now." Nobody said anything for a moment. In the east, the sky had crossed the line from dark to not dark, and somewhere beyond the yard's walls the academy was beginning to stir. The distant sound of a kitchen coming to life, a door, footsteps on stone. "Oh, 400, Tobias said. Every day, Keth Varal said. Yuki looked at him. "You're going to need better footwear," she said. He looked down at his boots, then up at her. "What's wrong with them?" "Nothing for the standard program," she said. "For the embankment carry, the heel-to-toe drop is wrong for the grade. You're losing 3% efficiency per 100 meters, and it will compound over a full session." He looked at his boots again, made another note on his forearm. "I'll source different ones," he said. "We brought extras," Yuki said. "Standard transit kit. I'll check the sizes." And that was how it began. Not with ceremony, not with a formal acknowledgement, not with any kind of declaration. Yuki knew where the spare boots were, and Keth Varal needed better boots for the embankment, and the morning was coming up clean and clear over the training yard of the Varric Saloon Combined Arms Academy. And for the next year we would be here, and there was work to do. The intake assembled at Fielded 0600 as ordered. Keth Varal ran them through a standard morning drill, precise and demanding and calibrated for where they were. He was good at that, finding the right pressure for the room, asking something real of each cadet without asking more than they could build from. I watched him work and saw, now that I knew what I was looking at, care in it. The year of intake design, the 100 decisions embedded in what looked, from the outside, like a standard military morning, At mid-morning, during a water break, Voth came and stood near me at the water station. He was a careful person, Voth, careful in the way that the genuinely strong are often careful, as though they have learned to modulate the signal because running at full output startles people. He had run 15 loops the previous day and walked 2 hours under load, and he had set his frame down with care when he was finished, and he had told me my pace was good. These were all data. There's a story in the barracks, he said, about this morning. Already? 4 humans running the yard at 4 in the morning with the instructor Primus. He looked at his water container. The story does not include details, only the fact. The fact is accurate, I said. He nodded slowly. There are cadets who are taking it as a remark about their own performance yesterday. It isn't. I know, he said, but they don't know you yet. He said this without judgment, just offering the information as a thing I might find useful. What do you take it as? I said. He considered. Yesterday, the instructor Primus ran an intake designed for this year's cadets. This morning, he is doing something different. He looked at me directly. I think he is building something for himself, and I think the 4 of you are the only ones at this academy capable of helping him build it. He's capable, I said. He'll outpace your read of him. I hope so, Voth said. He meant it. He finished his water and went back to the yard. As the months passed, Voth became a fixture at the edge of the morning sessions, not participating, never asking to, just present in the way that some people are present when they are watching something that is instructing them, without being addressed to them. Keth Varal noticed and said nothing about it, which I took as permission. One morning in the 3rd month, Voth arrived at the gate at 04:30, 30 minutes after us, but 30 minutes before anyone else would be awake, and sat on the gravel at the yard's edge with his arms on his knees and watched the load carry without comment. At the water break, Keth Varal looked at him and said, "You're early. The noise woke me," Voth said, which was plainly not true because we do not make noise. Keth Varal looked at him for a moment. "There's a spare frame in the storage shed," he said, calibrated at 30%. Voth got up and went to the storage shed and came back with the frame and put it on. He did not ask for instruction on the course. He walked to the start line and looked at us, and we began the next loop, and he fell in behind Yuki and ran it clean. After the session, none of us mentioned that he had joined. He had joined, that was the fact, and the fact did not require annotation. He came back the following morning, and the morning after that, and by the 5th morning, he was arriving at 0400 with the rest of us, which made the yard 6 people instead of 5, which changed the geometry of the sessions in ways that were mostly improvements. Thorin had a different ceiling than Keth Varal, and a different gap pattern. His eccentric loading was fine, better than Keth Varal's had been when we started, but his heat tolerance was lower than his cold tolerance. It was a Saluni pattern that Keth Varal confirmed when I asked him about it. The species had evolved in high-altitude cold, and the combination of heat and load was a specific vulnerability that the standard conditioning program addressed but did not fully correct. We added a heat block to the late morning parallel sessions. Voth worked it without complaint, sweating in the way that was visible and legitimate and not a performance, and by the 6th week, his heat numbers had moved perceptibly. The day his heat numbers cleared a threshold that Yuki had been tracking, she told him. Just that, your heat numbers cleared the mark. He looked at her and nodded once, and then looked at the yard surface for a moment, his water container down, and went back to the circuit. Yuki watched him go. "He's going to be good," she said. "He already is," I said. "Like us," she said. I thought about that. "Different good," I said. "Better in some ways," she said, and went back to the circuit herself. The days found their shape after that. At 0400, the yard belonged to 5 people, Keth Varal and us. We designed the program the way we had designed programs before, iteratively, adjusting in real time as we found the edges. Keth Varal brought 11 years of institutional knowledge, how the yard's surface behaved in different weather, where the load carrier course had blind spots in its design, which stations in the stress circuit were measuring the right thing, and which were measuring a proxy for the right thing that had been confused for the real thing over time. We brought what we brought. The first week was reconnaissance, mostly. Kethvaral was doing what he did, observing, noting, building a model of what we were, and how we moved, and what we could carry for how long. We were doing the same with him. It was a mutual assessment with no pretense otherwise, which made it cleaner than most assessments tend to be. What we found, he was stronger than his frame suggested, with a core-to-limb ratio that pointed to years of load work rather than gym conditioning. He recovered well, fast in the first interval, steady in the second, which is the pattern of a trained body rather than a merely fit one. His movement vocabulary was good across everything we showed him except one: sustained eccentric effort. The downhill portion of the embankment carry exposed a gap in his training history that he recognized himself the moment Dara pointed at it, because he went quiet in the way people go quiet when a mirror shows them something they have been looking away from. Downhill work, he said. Specific eccentric loading, Dara said. The uphill is in your body. The downhill isn't. Shh. He nodded once and asked her to show him the corrective sequence. And he ran it, at the end of every session thereafter, without being reminded. That was the thing about Kethvaral. He did not need to be told the same thing twice. Whatever the gap was, once it was visible to him, he moved to close it with the same economy he brought to everything else. There was no pride in the way to manage. He had been wrong about something, incomplete, and now he would be less wrong about it. That was all. Tobias said at the end of the second week, he's going to be a problem. I mean that as a compliment, Tobias said. In 3 months he's going to be asking us for harder problems and we're going to be running out of easy ones. Good, Dara said. I already know, I said. He's ahead of our week 2 projection. Tobias considered this. Yuki called it. Yuki had called it at the end of day 3. He's faster than the schedule. She had said it the way she said most things, without weight, and we had noted it and adjusted the program's timeline accordingly. The program did not ask him for things he was not ready to do. It asked him for things that were at the edge of what he was ready to do, which is different and harder to calibrate, because the edge moves as you push it, and if you stop pushing it, moves backward. We pushed. He pushed, the edge moved. The footwear question turned out to be representative of a larger category of adjustments, and Yuki worked through most of them quietly and without making an event of each one. She had a gift for precision of this kind, the identification of the variable that looks minor and is not. Kethvaral began watching how she thought, in the particular way that an experienced practitioner watches a younger one who is doing something the experienced practitioner has not seen before. One morning, about 3 weeks in, Kethvaral said to her, "How do you see it?" Yuki thought about this. "The loss is always in the transfer," she said. "The energy goes somewhere. Usually somewhere you didn't plan for it to go. If you find where it's going, you can redirect it." He considered this for a long time. "That is not how I was taught to think about efficiency," he said. "I know," she said. "It's how I think about it." He made a note on his forearm. The intake progressed. The formal program was good. Not moderate for the rest of the cadets, genuinely demanding. Kethvaral ran it, with the same care I had seen in those first days. The right pressure, the honest accounting, refusal to let anyone pretend a wall did not exist. I watched him work with Vothkoren, turned out to be one of those cadets who benefit from being pushed into territory they would not have entered alone, and saw the way Kethvaral calibrated each session to find the edge without going past it. And then, a session later, moved the edge. He was very good at what he did. I had known this from the first morning, but watching the work over weeks made its depth legible. At the 4-month mark, he found his wall. It was the embankment carry, 45% of body mass. We had added 5 points over the months. And the sessions was the 3rd consecutive day of heavy load work, which was a deliberate accumulated stress design. He was at the top of the embankment on the 4th loop, and I was on the straight below, and I saw the change in his gait that meant the warning had arrived. The stride shortened, the forward lean increased slightly, past the efficient angle, the cadence dropped. He did not set the frame down. He walked through it, not with the locked jaw and the visible spending of reserve that I had seen from the Solunai cadets on intake day, with something quieter than that, a decision that was not advertised. He came off the embankment and finished the loop. At the water station afterward, he said nothing about it, made no note on his forearm, drank and breathed and eventually looked at the sky, which was doing the copper and gray thing again. After a while he said, "The wall moved." "Yes," I said. "Is that what it does?" "When you push it." He drank more water. "Should have started this a decade ago." "Probably," I said. "But a decade ago you had 400 cadets to find walls for." He looked at me. "Is that a diplomatic answer?" "It's an accurate one," I said. "The work you've done for 11 years is real work." "That's real too. You've found your wall now. That's what matters." He was quiet for a moment. "I owe this program a redesign," he said. "The full intake program. Not just the parallel track." He looked at his forearm, where today's notes were written. "Shh. There are things I was testing that I should not have been testing. And things I was not testing that I should have been. I have been using the same calibration for 11 years. He paused. "The calibration was not wrong. But it was incomplete. That's a large project," I said. 11 years is a large project, he said. 1 year is the beginning of a revision." He stood up and walked back to the yard, and the morning continued. At the end of the year, at the formal intake assessment, the ceremony at which the Varric Solon Academy graduated its cadets to active track standing, and the annual report went to the Joint Command. Keth Varal stood at the front of the assembly hall and delivered intake remarks in the standard format. 43 cadets entered. 31 graduated to active track. 9 were reassigned. 2 were medically separated. 1 withdrew voluntarily. The numbers were on the higher end of his historical average, which the Academy's administrative staff noted approvingly. He delivered the remarks with the same stripped economy he brought to everything. No excess, no performance. At the end, he said, "This intake was the first in which I revised the calibration of the program mid-year. That revision is ongoing. The next intake will run a modified program. This is what the program should always have been. Not static, not fixed, in ongoing calibration with what it actually encounters." He paused. "I would like to thank the 4 light infantry support cadets in this intake for what they contributed to that process." He did not look at us when he said this. He looked at the assembled hall. They showed me where I had stopped asking the question. The hall was quiet for a moment. Then the ceremony continued, the way ceremonies do, because the world does not pause for the moments that matter. It just folds them into the ordinary flow of things, and you carry them with you after. We graduated. The paperwork said Light Infantry Support, Grade 2. We had not asked anyone to change it, and no one had. Vath Koran found me after the ceremony. In the yard, the formal assembly had overflowed into the open space. Cadets and instructors and a handful of administrative staff, filling the area in the loose, informal way of an event that has officially ended but hasn't quite dispersed, he said. "Good year." "Yes," I said. "Does a good year look like for you?" he said. Not challenging. Genuinely curious. I thought about it. "Like this morning was harder than last morning," I said. "And tomorrow is going to be harder than today." He considered that. "Is it ever enough?" "No," I said. "But that's not what it's for." He nodded slowly. I had the impression he was going to carry that for a while, which seemed fine. Keth Varal was across the yard, talking with his assistant instructors. The young one with the clean rank bar, who had spent the year watching the parallel track sessions, with an attention that had gradually sharpened from bewilderment into something more like study. She was asking him something now, her slate in hand, and Keth Varal was answering in that stripped, carrying voice, and whatever he was saying she was writing down. Tobias came up beside me. "He's going to redesign the whole program," Tobias said. "He already has," I said. "The redesign just isn't on paper yet. It will." "Yes." Tobias watched the yard for a moment. The light was doing the copper and gray thing again, the sky committed to it at this hour. "You think he finds it? The wall?" "Yeah. I thought about the embankment 4 months back. The changed gate at the top. The decision made quietly, without advertisement, to not set the frame down. He already found it," I said. "He just keeps moving it." Tobias made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound he made when an answer was exactly right, and he did not feel the need to add to it. We stood in the yard until the ceremony dispersed and the copper went out of the sky and the stars came in. The same stars we had looked up at on the first morning when we arrived. The same yard and the same gravel and the same cool to heat to cool, that the planet did every day without fail. We had a transport off-world at 0600. At 0400, I was in the yard, so was Keth Varal. He looked at me when I walked in from the gate. I looked at him. No intake, no cadets, no program to run, and no performance to deliver. Just the yard, and the dark, and the cool ground, and the particular freedom that belongs to people who have agreed to do something real. One last morning, I said. A morning, he said. Last is a measurement, we're not measuring. He was right. I conceded the point. I ran the warm-up. He followed. We moved through the sequence that Tobias had designed in those first weeks, and it felt exactly as it had felt every morning since. Precise, functional, a door you open rather than a destination. At the end of the warm-up, I looked at him, and he looked at me. And we did not need to discuss what came next, because we had run this enough times, that the logic of it was in our bodies now. We started the load carry. The gravel was firm and cool underfoot, and the stars were thick overhead, and somewhere in the dark behind us, the academy was sleeping, and in a few hours it would wake and become what it was. A place of instruction, of assessment, of calibration. But right now, in the 4 o'clock quiet, it was just a yard and two organisms with weight on their backs, finding out what they were made of, which is, in the end, the only exercise worth doing, the only one that never ends.